Mr. Samuelson, how we doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing fantastic. How's your day going so far?
Day's going well. Going well. I've been watching your show on and off, so just getting a little feel for what you guys do. It's my first time on, so.
Yeah, we don't have a feel for our show anyway. We talk about whatever we feel like talking about. We do have like a document that has like notes on it that we never follow ever. So it all. Best laid plans and all that. All right. I mentioned that you're from the BRON Investor Network. Tell us about that. Tell us like the purpose here, because you worked on Wall Street for a long time and you walked away from all that. Why?
Well, yeah, I was on Wall Street longer than I want to say, about 30 years, and the last almost 20 years was as working for a large hedge fund and investing in the U.S., but mainly outside the U.S. and emerging markets, Europe, et cetera. If whether you're working for a hedge fund or long only, information is everything, right? How to get information, how to get it before the others get it, and being able to access information. And what I found, especially with foreign companies and even U.S. companies, you can put in this category, is that these companies, despite what everyone believes, which is a lot of companies don't want to tell you everything, every country in the world, including China, has full disclosure laws like we have here in the U.S. And they're required, and they do put out a lot of information. The problem is that even if you're an institutional investor, getting that information is very difficult. But more importantly, it's time consuming. If you're a retail investor, it's almost impossible to get that information, even though it's out there. As you said, in the ecosystem, just getting the information is very difficult. So,
what information are we talking about here? We're not talking about like 10Ks and 8Ks, right?
Well, that's in part of it, but it's other things. It's just think about it. It's press releases, sort of blocking and tackling. It's presentations, which really educate investors on how companies are doing currently and in the future. It's nowadays we're talking about. A lot of companies are doing videos, they're doing infographics. A lot of this information doesn't even get to Bloomberg. And, their Bloomberg investors are paying $35,000 a year or so to get everything. They don't get everything. So imagine an individual investor just is behind the wheel there. So we're talking about all kinds of information, not just the boring regulatory stuff, but a lot of information that companies want you to see to educate you, to get them to understand their story better.
Okay, so where can we find this information? If you insist that it's out there, and I'm assuming you know this because like I said, you worked for hedge funds for a long time, they have this information. How do I, as a retail investor, get said information?
Well, the easiest way is to go onto the BRON Investor Network app. So why do I create this, right? That was a nice lead-in. I appreciate that, Spencer. So what do we create this? We wanted to create an ecosystem where all investors can have access to this information easily. So think of us as an Expedia, but not for travel, but for corporate data. So we're an information aggregator. And instead of creating a website or a database, what we did was we said, look, what is the future? Where are people accessing information, even for stocks? Well, you guys know better than anybody. They're on social media. So what we decided was to take this concept, take all this data, and instead of putting it just on a website, we created what we call a social network community. So if you go onto our app, it looks and feels like any other type of social media app, but it's very specific to this aggregating of corporate information. You go in, you follow, let's say, for example, if you're interested in cannabis, we have over 120 cannabis companies. You follow the 50 or 10 or 20, whatever cannabis companies you follow, and on your news feed, you're going to see everything these companies put out, not just what someone wants you to see, but what they actually put out. So as you mentioned, firms like yours and others, you get information all over the place, and you're obviously posting news, you're posting research. We don't post any of that. It's only thing we post right now is corporate information, what the companies want you to see and hear. And this is the trend, I think, that we're seeing around the world, and certainly in the U.S. There's a monumental shift going in terms of market structure from institutional to retail.
But the first thing I think about when I hear like corporate information and investors not having access to it is like a lot of these foreign companies, frankly. And I hate to point the finger. I mean, but China has had problems with this, right? Where there have been companies that have IPO'd and then, weeks later, oh, wait a minute, they're under investigation from their own government. What? Right? And I don't know how much of that the companies knew or didn't know before the IPO, but it certainly is a bad look. So, whether you want to talk about China or any other emerging market, frankly, I mean, you said that, there are disclosure laws out there, but I can't help but think that some of these companies are just not being upfront.
Yeah, I mean, China is a unique case. I would say that the disclosure around the world is better than the perceived disclosure, but China is a unique case. I invested there for over 15 years. Getting information from Chinese companies is challenging, not only because of the language barrier, but for obvious reasons. But interesting enough, I think the problem that we're seeing with the current Chinese companies today, again, is perception versus reality. And also the problem is the investment banks. I'm not a big fan of the investment banks, but they'll do these IPOs, they'll come out with these companies, they'll pump them up, and then 3 months later, there's no research, there's nothing, there's no information, nobody knows how, no one could read. An average U.S. investor is not going to go into a Chinese website and start translating Chinese.
Of course not.
It's not going to happen. So, there's a lot of people to blame for it. The companies are certainly part of the blame. But I say, on the whole, China is not the greatest place for full disclosure, especially the ones that are listed only here or only in China. The ones listed in Hong Kong, they have a different kind of regulatory oversight. They're much better.
Can you give us an example, the kind of information that you saw in your time in the hedge fund world that the hedge funds had access to, that everyone else also has access to, but maybe doesn't know to look for it or doesn't even know where it is?
Sure, I'll give you two examples. One is a real easy example. Presentations, right? Every company does corporate presentations, either before a conference or before an investor conference or during their earnings call. So they do at least 4, 5, 6 presentations, very detailed presentations. I would say 90+%, 95% of the individuals or investors that are non-institutional but have no idea that these things exist. And these are incredibly detailed. There are companies that do 140-page investor day presentations or 50-page earnings presentations, which have incredible amounts of data that just doesn't get out there. So as a hedge fund manager, I had access to this information, not only because I went to different investment conferences and it was handed to me, but I knew that it was out there, so I knew how to get it. But that's one example. The other type of information that's out there that, it costs a little money, but sometimes is you have all this alternative data that's out there, especially with the foreign companies. People are analyzing ships going in and out of ports, that type of thing. Again, available to institutional investors, not available to individual investors. But that data is out there because somebody's grabbing that data, and it's not, it's sometimes it costs a lot, sometimes it doesn't. But those are two extreme examples of information that we used. That's one is very easily available, one is not so easy. But again, all this information is out there in the web. But it's very difficult to find, and more importantly, it's incredibly time-consuming.
So I'm assuming those presentations that you speak of they're on the app, right?
Yeah, everything that a company does, whether it's presentation, the video, that type of thing, is all on our application. Yeah.
What
including ESG, by the way, which is a big topic, but a lot of ESG information.
I'm sorry, they're what?
Including ESG information. And the interesting part is that there are foreign companies especially, and there are a lot of you, are spending enormous amounts of money, $50,000 to $100,000 a year just to do ESG information, put these giant reports together. And that information Bloomberg doesn't even publish that, a lot of it. So you guys aren't publishing. So it's out there. And a lot of especially Gen Z investors but they never see it.
What kinds of companies, or how many companies, or what kinds of companies are on? Is it every public company you have on the app, or what? How does that work?
No, we have right now in emerging markets, mainly South America, we've got close to 500 companies. And in the US, we've got certain sectors like cannabis, we've got clean energy,
Okay.
and blockchain. So we're expanding that way organically.
Got it. All right, Thomas Samuelson is the founder of the BRON Investor Network. I would encourage everyone to check out the app. You can go to the App Store, I'm assuming Android and Apple, and just search for BRON, BRON, and you'll find it right then and there.
BRON Investor Network.
That's it. Thomas, have a great rest of your day. Thanks, Spencer, joining us today on Benzinga Live.
Appreciate it. Thanks again.